Hi, this is Teddy, and you're listening to Jill Karofsky on Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Demcast Podcast Network.
Are you listening?
Hey everybody, this is Sophy from Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Demcast family of podcasts, and I am joined today by the second broad, Jill Karofsky. She is running for the Supreme Court in Wisconsin in 2020. Welcome!
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you so much for having me on.
Wow, we're really excited to have you. So can we just start off sort of talking about you? Tell us a little bit about who you are and kind of your career to this point and what made you want to run for the Supreme Court in Wisconsin.
Sure. I'm running for the Supreme Court on Wisconsin because we have got to get our court back on track. I've spent the past several months traveling all around the state, and I hear the same thing from people. They're really concerned by what they see on the Supreme Court. And what they see are judges, justices who make decisions before anyone ever walks in the state Supreme Court chamber, justices who do not follow the rule of law, and justices who are more interested in protecting corporations than they are in protecting our air and water from corporate pollution. And all of that feels like corruption to people. So I'm in this race. I'm offering my experience, my values, and my energy. I'm bringing that to the race. I'm going to bring that to the Wisconsin Supreme Court because these elections matter and they have huge consequences. So as far as my experience, look, I'm the only person in this race who is or who has ever been a trial court judge. I'm a trial court judge in Dane County right now. I heard over 1,700 cases last year. I'm in court every day. I see how the law impacts real people. I know how important it is to treat everybody in my courtroom with fairness and dignity and respect. I know following the rule of law is of the utmost importance. And when I'm looking at a document like the Constitution, I need to interpret it with today in mind because it is 2020. I also have experience as a prosecutor. I was a prosecutor for many, many years, again here in Dane County. I know how to be smart on crime. I know the importance of protecting individual rights, the rights of witnesses and defendants and victims and members of the public. And I've also been a victim advocate. I was Wisconsin's first violence against women resource prosecutor, and I was the head of Wisconsin's Office of Crime Victim Services, where I helped victims in every single county in Wisconsin get the help and the services and the support that they needed as their case was winding through the criminal justice system. So that's the experience that I'm going to bring to this race and bring to our court.
That's awesome. I want to follow up a little bit. You mentioned that you have been a prosecutor, and I know that recently in the Democratic primary, some people have maybe seen that as a negative thing for other candidates, particularly Kamala Harris. I was wondering if you could expound a little bit upon what sort of your past as a prosecutor helps you bring to the Supreme Court.
Sure. As a prosecutor, I really focused on crimes where women and victims and people in need had been hurt by someone else. I specialized in cases of domestic abuse and child abuse, sexual assault and child sexual assault. And so those were the types of cases that I was involved in largely, or that I specialized in. And I think that it gave me a perspective of making sure that everyone's voice was heard in the criminal justice system. If you are a victim of crime, you're almost sometimes victims are forgotten. Their voice is not heard. And what working on those cases taught me was how important every single person's voice is in the criminal justice system. And then I was able to take the work that I did as an assistant DA and springboard off of that when I went to the Wisconsin Department of Justice and was the Violence Against Women Resource Prosecutor and then the head of the Office of Crime Victim Services.
So I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about some of the issues that maybe people are concerned about? You had mentioned people being concerned about judges who are coming into the Supreme Court with their minds already made up. Sort of how do you approach a case to try and avoid deciding on something, particularly when it's like a high profile case, before it gets to you?
Sure. I mean, and I'm the only person in this race who has frontline judicial experience because I've been both a prosecutor, because I am a trial court judge right now. So every single day, what I do is I look at the facts of the case, I look at the law, and I do my best to apply the law to the facts of the case fairly and impartially, without fear or favor. And I do it over and over and over again. And I often rule against what my own political or personal views are. And I'm the only one in this race who is able to offer examples of when I have done that. And when I do that, I do it sometimes many times in a week. But that experience is so important for someone who is going to ultimately be on our Wisconsin Supreme Court, because I can see how the law impacts real people. Look, the law isn't some esoteric exercise if you are a crime victim. And it's not an esoteric exercise if you're in a divorce and someone is telling you how your property is going to be divvied up or where your kids are going to sleep tonight. And it's not an esoteric exercise if you are a landlord or a tenant and you're involved in an eviction action. And I see and I feel and I hear how the law impacts real people. And that's the experience I think we need to have on our Supreme Court.
I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about an issue that has been really important to a lot of the voters that I know, which is voter registrations. There's a big judicial fight happening in Wisconsin right now over whether or not we should purge some voters from the voter rolls. How do you think about that case, and sort of what do you think the right outcome is?
So I want to be careful about this case in particular because the way that it's going now, I'm elected to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, there's a chance that I might be one of the justices who will decide on that case. So I don't want to talk about how I would rule or what I think should happen. I will say this, that I think that the right to vote is a cornerstone of our democracy. And I believe that anyone and everyone who is eligible to vote should be able to vote.
I definitely agree. One thing we often talk to candidates about is what it's like, particularly candidates who have children, what it's like running for office sort of in the real world. And I know you have two kids. You have a daughter in college and a son in high school, and you are running for office as a mother, as sort of a community member. So could you just talk a little bit about what the experience of running has been like for you and for your family?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I talk to my kids about this all the time. And I tell them that they are true warriors. I mean, if you think about who gives up the most when a parent runs for office, it's their kids. And my kids have been great. They are incredibly supportive. They understand why this is such an important election. And they are just with me 100%. I'm very, very lucky. And what I say to them is that I'm doing this for you and because of you, and I could not do it without you. You know, our kids see what's going on. When I talk to my kids about running for the Supreme Court, I said to them, what are your concerns? And my kids are concerned about gun violence. They don't want to go to school anymore for code red drills. They want to go to school to learn. My kids and I all have gone to public schools with wonderful, wonderful teachers. And my kids want to go to school to learn. They're concerned about the climate crisis. And they understand what the status of our planet is right now. They understand science. They understand that we are in a predicament and we need to figure our way out of it. They also can see corruption on the state and the federal level, and they're looking to the grown-ups in the room to solve these problems. And it's the least we can do for all of our kids is to try to solve these problems. I will say, on the other hand, it's busy. I mean, my days are busy. I am in court. I had 294 cases, I think, calendared this week. I am duty judge in Dane County next week, which means I'll have a very, very busy week, and I'll be available 24/7 to the police officers in Dane County if they need warrants. I campaign after work, and I campaign on the weekends, and it's a very, very busy schedule. I wouldn't do it if it weren't worth if I didn't think it was hugely, hugely important. And there are many, many times when I'm feeling a little tired and I will go somewhere or I will talk to somebody or I will read something and I am just invigorated and energized because people around the state understand why this race is so important. And we are on our campaign, we are gaining more and more supporters every single day. And that really is, it really buoys me when I'm feeling kind of tired.
So Wisconsin is a pretty big state. I've
Yeah.
driven up to the Apostle Islands, and it's bigger than people think. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of different types of places in Wisconsin. A lot of very rural areas, a lot of very urban areas, like where I live in Madison and in Milwaukee and in Green Bay, in Eau Claire. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about having to travel around the state. Sort of what is your impression of the voters across the state?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Wisconsin, and I grew up in South Central Wisconsin. My mom was mayor of the city I grew up in when I was growing up, and so I watched her bring
Oh, cool.
emergency medical service. It was super cool. She brought emergency medical service, and she brought buses into our town. And the first time I walked into a courtroom, I was only 10, and I went in there to change my middle name so I could be named after her. And my dad was a local
Neat.
pediatrician. When he retired, the first thing he did was he opened up a free clinic. So teens had access to medical care because he knew if he did not open up this clinic, there were going to be some teenagers who wouldn't have access to medical care any other way. So my parents always taught me the importance of public service and taking care of people in my community. And being born and raised in Wisconsin, I traveled all around the state from the time I was really little. Heaven for me is being anywhere outside in the state of Wisconsin. I love traveling around the state. I always have. I worked at the Department of Justice for many years, and I was traveling around the state every single week. And I just love what the state has to offer. It is beautiful, from the forests up north to the lakes to the Mississippi River to the Wisconsin River to the farmlands down where you and I live, and the urban areas too. It's just a really, really pretty state, and I always get excited when I got to drive all the way up to Ashland in October when the leaves were changing. And I have seen some of the prettiest sunsets. I drove one night over to Eau Claire just as the sun was setting, and it was just the most gorgeous sunset I've ever seen. I've been taking videos and pictures as I've been campaigning just to remember some of the beauty of the state. So, and people are great everywhere I go. Like I said, they're energized about our campaign. They understand why it's important. They want their voices to be heard. They don't want corruption in their court system. And they're energized to do something about it on February 18th and on April 7th.
Follow-up question. This is a special question I only ever ask people who are running for office in Wisconsin or working in Wisconsin. I'm obsessed with Wisconsin, and I think it's amazing. What is your favorite part about living in Wisconsin?
My favorite part about living in Wisconsin is the people. They are the nicest, kindest people. And I'm struck by it everywhere I go. People who are, I pay my gas and someone's checking me out and they're asking me how my day is. Or I'm walking into a room of people where I don't know anybody and people are just very, very kind. I've been making phone calls all throughout the state many, many times a week, and people are just nice and they're kind in this state. They have big hearts. They're good people.
I agree. But I would, because I'm from Wisconsin.
Midwest nice, I think, is what they call it, right?
Yes, it is so.
If
It is so
you
true.
go to another state or another part of the country, you're really. My brother lives in Denver, and he was here for Thanksgiving a couple of years ago, and he got up one morning and he went for a run just around my house, and he came home and I said, "How was your run?" And he said, "It was exhausting." And I said, "What do you mean? What was so exhausting?" And he said, "Every person I saw said hello to me or good morning." He said it was really exhausting. That doesn't happen where I come from, and it's true.
That's so funny because my husband and I moved here almost 6 years ago from Chicago, and we had lived in New York City prior to that. And when we moved
Mm-hmm.
here, like for the first month, every time somebody would say, "Hi, how you doing? Hi, how's it going?" We would just look at each other and go, "What is wrong with these people?
Right.
Why
No,
are
it's
they
true.
talking
And
to
then
me and
if
being
I go to New
nice?"
York, right. And then if I go to New York City, I'll be running and I'll say hi to everyone and no one talks to me. And I think, what's wrong? What did I do? Or what's wrong with these people? Yeah, it's very, very funny. But it's true. People are very, very nice and kind here.
So your primary is coming up pretty quickly. The primary in Wisconsin is going to be on February 18th. What is your focus moving into this last month, and sort of what can people do to help you right now, right before the election?
The primary is February 18th. And we, like I said, we have some great momentum in this campaign. We have had 200 individual donations. We've raised over $350,000. We are running a strong statewide professional campaign. We have endorsements from Justice Rebecca Dallett, Wisconsin's last 3 Democratic governors, over 24 legislators. We have bipartisan support from judges and from DAs and from sheriffs, and we have support from local officials from every corner of Wisconsin. We feel really good about the primary, but we need people to get to the polls. We also need people to get on board on our campaign. We have a website. It's jillforjustice.com. We have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter page. We have an Instagram page as well. So if people are willing to get on, if they would get on any of those social media platforms and share those and get their friends to share those, if they would talk to their friends about the importance of this race, talk to their neighbors about the importance of this race, get people to the polls, get people out to vote.
Jill, is there anything else you want to make sure that we talk about?
You know, I talked about a little bit about the experience that I have. I talked about my values growing up in Middleton, Wisconsin, where my mom was mayor. I'd love people to know that my kids and I all went to public schools. We've had wonderful, wonderful teachers. I've talked to my kids about the importance of women's rights and workers' rights and civil rights and human rights. And as I mentioned, my kids are concerned about gun violence and the climate crisis and corruption, and we need to do something about those things. So in addition to the experience that I talked about and those values, the other thing I'm bringing to this race is my energy. I was a state high school tennis champion. I was a Division I athlete in track and cross country, finished the Ironman triathlon 2 times. I now can run 50-mile ultra marathons. I have never been outworked or out-hustled, and there is no way in this race I'm going to be outworked or out-hustled. We really need people to get on board now. We cannot afford 10 more years of Dan Kelly on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. He was the last guy Scott Walker appointed, and he was appointed even though he had 0 judicial experience. But Scott Walker put him on the court to carry the water of corporations, of the wealthy, and of right-wing special interests. And Dan Kelly has done that. He has not spilled a drop of their water. And having Dan Kelly on the court until 2030 will be very, very bad for Wisconsin. So the primary is February 18th. Please get on board. The general election is April 7th. That's the general election in the state Supreme Court race. It's also Wisconsin's presidential primary, so we should have high voter turnout. But we need to make sure people vote all the way down the ballot. That didn't happen in 2016, and we paid for that. So we need to make sure that people vote all the way down the ballot in 2020. I just want to let people know that the next time that we're going to have a chance to elect a Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin is 2023. So this is our chance to make a difference on our Supreme Court. And I cannot emphasize enough how important this race is. This court is going to hear cases about gerrymandering because we're going to redraw our legislative lines after we all fill out our census in April. This court will likely hear cases about women's access to health care. This court is very likely to hear cases about how we're going to keep our air and our water clean. What's Wisconsin's response going to be to criminal justice reform, to gun violence? What is democracy in this state going to look like? All of those issues are going to land at the doorstep of our Supreme Court. Who we have on our court matters. These elections have consequences. Please vote Jill for Justice, February 18th, and again on April 7th.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Jill. I was excited to vote for Rebecca Dallett, and she won, and now I'm excited to vote for you, and I'm excited really excited to see you bring back the rule of law to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. So thank you so much for running, and thank you so much for talking to me. And listeners should be going to your website. And if you live in Wisconsin, please consider, volunteering and helping Jill's campaign out. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophie.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.